I still remember the feeling of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach as I stepped into the old, musty archive room. As a renowned cryptozoologist and parapsychologist, I'd spent years searching for clues to explain the unknown, but nothing could have prepared me for what lay ahead. The dimly lit room was a labyrinth of dusty shelves, overflowing with ancient tomes and forgotten relics. The air reeked of decay and neglect, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes scanned the rows of books, my fingers trailing over the spines as I searched for any mention of the Dark Somnium. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an obscure text, bound in worn leather and adorned with strange symbols, that I realized the true extent of my discovery. The title, Somnium Tenebrarum, was etched in a language I couldn't understand, but the illustrations depicted a realm of twisted nightmares, where the fabric of reality was torn asunder. A shiver ran down my spine as I turned the pages, the words blurring together on the page. It was as if the author had captured the essence of something malevolent, something that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than myself, something that would change the course of my life forever. The archive room seemed to grow darker, the shadows deepening as I delved deeper into the book. I felt a presence around me, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. My skin crawled beneath my skin, and for a moment I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back now. I had to know more about the Dark Somnium, about the creature that lurked within its depths. And so, with a sense of trepidation, I began my descent into the unknown. I spent the next few days immersed in the ancient text, poring over every word and illustration. The symbols etched into the pages seemed to dance across the page, taunting me with their meaning. It was as if the author had unlocked a door, one that led to a realm beyond our own. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the Dark Somnium, convinced that it held the key to understanding the mysteries of the universe. My colleagues began to notice a change in me, a sense of detachment that bordered on obsession. They warned me to be careful to leave the research alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the cusp of something momentous. And then, it happened. While studying late one night, I stumbled upon an obscure passage that described a gateway to another realm. The words seemed to leap off the page, their meaning crystal clear. Where shadows dance, the veil is thin. I felt a jolt of electricity run through my veins as I realized that I had found it, the entrance to the Dark Somnium. A shiver ran down my spine as I gazed upon the illustration, a depiction of a twisted, nightmarish landscape. The creatures that inhabited this realm seemed to writhe and twist on the page, their forms indistinct and unsettling. I knew then that I had to investigate further, to uncover the secrets that lay beyond the gateway. And so, with a sense of trepidation, I began to prepare myself for what was to come. I couldn't shake the feeling of excitement that coursed through my veins as I prepared to embark on this journey. The prospect of uncovering secrets that had lain hidden for centuries was exhilarating, and I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. I spent hours poring over maps, studying the layout of the gateway, and researching the history behind it. My colleagues thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I was convinced that this was going to change everything. As the night wore on, I found myself becoming more and more agitated, my mind racing with possibilities. What lay beyond the gateway? What kind of creatures inhabited the Dark Somnium? And what secrets would be revealed to me when I finally stepped through its threshold? The questions swirled in my head like a maelstrom, driving me forward with an unstoppable momentum. I felt alive, electric, and utterly consumed by this singular focus. My phone rang, shrill and insistent, shattering the spell of anticipation that had settled over me. It was my research assistant, Sarah, calling to check in on my progress. We chatted for a few minutes, discussing everything from our plans to the latest developments in the field. But even as I spoke with her, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were trained on me, waiting for me to make my next move. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I listened to Sarah's voice, a gentle hum that seemed to reverberate through every cell in my body. And then, just as we were wrapping up our conversation, she said it, "Be careful, Dr. Rodriguez." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment I wondered if I'd misinterpreted the tone of her voice entirely. But Sarah was always the voice of reason, and I knew that she wouldn't say something like that unless she truly meant it. I stood in front of the gateway, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. The air was heavy with anticipation, thick with an almost palpable sense of expectation. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down, but it was no use. My hands were shaking as I reached out to touch the stone. It felt cold and damp beneath my fingertips, and for a moment I could have sworn that I saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing. Just the darkness, like an abyss waiting to swallow me whole. I stepped back, my heart racing with excitement and fear. What would happen if I went through this gateway? Would I find answers to all my questions, or would I unleash a horror beyond comprehension? The uncertainty hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to take the next step. My hand hesitated for what felt like an eternity, poised on the threshold between reality and madness. And then, with a sense of resolve that surprised even myself, I took the leap. I stepped through the gateway, into the unknown. The world around me dissolved into chaos. Colors swirled together in a mad dance. Sounds assaulted my ears from every direction, and the air seemed to writhe and twist like a living thing. I stumbled forward, blind and disoriented, as if I'd been dropped into a dream from which I couldn't wake up. And then, suddenly, I saw it. A creature unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was tall and twisted, its body a mass of writhing tendrils and bulging sacs that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Its eyes were black holes that sucked all the light out of the air, leaving only darkness in their wake. I froze, my heart paralyzed with fear. The creature didn't move or speak, but I could feel its presence like a weight crushing me beneath its gaze. For what felt like an eternity, we locked eyes, the only sound the heavy breathing that seemed to fill my lungs. And then, without warning, everything went white. As I regained consciousness, I found myself back in my laboratory, the only sound the soft hum of the equipment around me. It was as if the entire encounter had been a dream, but deep down, I knew that it hadn't. The creature's eyes still lingered in my mind, like two black holes sucking all the light out of the world. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I needed to rationalize what had happened, to find some logical explanation for the encounter. I began to review the research on the Dark Somnium, poring over the notes and papers that Sarah and I had gathered over the years. The more I read, the more questions I had. What was this place? What kind of creatures inhabited it? And what did they want from me? Theories swirled in my mind like a maelstrom, each one more improbable than the last. Some said that the Dark Somnium was a portal to another dimension, a gateway between worlds. Others believed that it was a realm of pure chaos, where the laws of physics no longer applied. And then there were those who thought that it was something far more sinister, a place where the very fabric of reality was torn apart, revealing the horrors that lurked beneath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, something that threatened to consume me whole. As I delved deeper into my research, I began to uncover some disturbing patterns. There were reports of similar encounters by other researchers who had ventured into the Dark Somnium, but none of them had returned. It was as if they had been consumed by the very place itself, leaving behind only whispers of their existence. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew that I had to be careful. I couldn't let myself get too close to the edge, or I risked falling into the abyss. But at the same time, I was drawn to it like a moth to flame. I needed to know more to uncover the secrets of the Dark Somnium and what lay beyond its gates. And so, with a sense of trepidation, I began to plan my next move. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled towards the Dark Somnium, like a ship to a rocky shore. Every day, I felt myself becoming more and more drawn to the gateway, as if an unseen force was urging me to take the next step. And then, one night, it happened. As I stood in front of the gateway, I could feel the air around me begin to vibrate with energy. The symbols etched into the stone seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the shadows cast by the flickering candles appeared to twist and writhe like living things. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, and reached out to touch the gateway once more. As soon as my skin made contact with the stone, I felt a sudden jolt of electricity run through my body. The world around me began to blur and distort, like a painting smeared by a wet brush. And then, in an instant, everything went white. When my vision returned, I found myself standing on the other side of the gateway. I was no longer alone. A figure stood before me, its features indistinct and shrouded in shadow. It didn't move or speak, but I could sense a presence emanating from it, a presence that seemed to be watching me with cold, calculating eyes. I felt a surge of fear run through my veins, but as I looked into the figure's face, I saw something there that gave me pause. A glimmer of recognition, perhaps. Or was it something more? Something that spoke to a deep and ancient memory within me. I couldn't quite place it, but I knew that I had stumbled upon something much bigger than myself. The veil between worlds seemed to be thinning, and I was being drawn into the very heart of the Dark Somnium. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me as I walked back into my laboratory. The encounter with the figure on the other side of the gateway still lingered in my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. But as I began to sort through the data I had collected during my research, I realized that something was off. Equipment was malfunctioning, files were out of place, and an eerie feeling seemed to permeate every corner of the lab. At first, I thought it might be due to the stress of dealing with the Dark Somnium, but as I delved deeper into the lab, I began to notice something more sinister. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, darting around the edges of my vision and disappearing into the corners. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. Something was watching me from the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. I started to feel like I was being herded towards some unknown fate with no escape in sight. The air grew colder and heavier, and I could sense a malevolent presence lurking just out of sight. My skin crawled as I realized that I wasn't alone in the lab. There were others there, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, its back to me. It was tall and imposing, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure slowly turned towards me, its gaze fixed on mine like a cold, hard weight. And then everything went black. I came to in a cold sweat, my heart racing like a jackhammer. The lab around me was dark and silent, the only sound the soft hum of the equipment. I lay there for a moment, trying to remember what had happened. And then it all came flooding back. The figure in the corner, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. My voice caught in my throat as I realized that I must have screamed, but there was no one there to hear me. The lab seemed to be empty, except for the shadows that danced on the walls like living things. I threw off the covers and got out of bed, needing to get away from the oppressive feeling that had settled over me. But as I walked through the lab, I realized that everything was different. The equipment was rearranged, the files were in a different order, and the shadows seemed to be moving of their own accord. It was as if someone had been there while I was unconscious, playing with my perceptions. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. Something was off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. I decided to try and find some answers in the data, hoping that if I could uncover a clue, I might be able to make sense of what was happening. But as I sat down at my computer, I realized that I wasn't alone. The screen flickered to life, displaying a message that made my blood run cold. "They're waiting for you." As I sat at my computer, staring at the screen with a sense of dread, I realized that something was very wrong. The words, "they're waiting for you," seemed to be seared into my brain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, but deep down I knew better. Suddenly, the air in the lab began to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. The shadows on the walls seemed to coalesce into a presence, a palpable force that filled the room. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone. Something was here with me, something that didn't belong in this world. And then I saw it. A figure tall and imposing, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. It stood just behind me, its presence filling the entire room. I tried to turn around, but my body seemed frozen in place. The alien's gaze was like a cold wind, sweeping over me with an unspeakable malevolence. I felt my mind reeling, unable to comprehend the horror that was staring back at me. And then, in a voice that was both ancient and eternal, it spoke. "We have been waiting," it said. "We have been waiting for you." The words seemed to echo through eternity, leaving me shaken and trembling with fear. I knew then that I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, something that threatened the very fabric of reality. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality as the alien's words hung in the air. The room around me began to blur and distort, like a painting smeared by a wet brush. Colors merged together, shapes shifted and twisted, and time itself seemed to warp and bend. I stumbled backwards, desperate to escape the chaos that was unfolding before my eyes. But it was too late. The alien's presence had already seeped into my mind, infecting my thoughts and perceptions. I saw double images of myself, like echoes of a forgotten self. I heard whispers in my ear, tempting me with forbidden knowledge. I felt my memories unraveling thread by thread like a tapestry torn apart by an unseen hand. And then everything went white. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. The lab around me was silent and still, the equipment humming softly in the distance. But something felt off. The world seemed different. The laws of physics were no longer binding, like a flexible rulebook that could be bent and twisted at will. I stood up, shaking my head to clear the cobwebs. But as I looked around, I saw that reality was blurring once more. The furniture seemed to shift and melt like wax in a furnace. The air was filled with strange, swirling patterns that defied explanation. And then I heard it, a voice whispering in my ear, "You are no longer human." As I stood there, staring at the blurred world around me, I felt my mind begin to unravel. The voice in my ear grew louder, more insistent, until it was almost deafening. "You are no longer human," it repeated over and over again. I tried to shake off the feeling of despair that washed over me, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. It was futile. The world around me continued to distort and twist, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. I stumbled through the lab, desperate to escape the madness that was closing in on me. But every door I opened led only to more questions, more confusion. The equipment seemed to be working against me, as if it had developed a malevolent mind of its own. I tried to shut down the computers, but they just wouldn't turn off. They kept running, humming with an otherworldly energy that filled my veins with a creeping sense of dread. I felt myself becoming detached from reality, like an observer watching a train wreck from a safe distance. I was powerless to stop it, unable to intervene in any meaningful way. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor once more, my head throbbing with pain. But something was different. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I looked around, trying to take stock of my surroundings, but my mind refused to cooperate. The world seemed different. The colors were brighter, the shadows deeper. And then I saw it. A figure standing in front of me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Welcome," it said, its voice like a rusty gate. "You are one of us now." As I gazed into the eyes of the figure standing before me, I felt a sense of recognition wash over me. It was as if I had been here before, though I knew that was impossible. The figure began to speak, its voice like a gentle breeze on a summer's day, but with an undercurrent of malevolence that sent shivers down my spine. "You have been chosen," it said, "chosen to join us in our eternal slumber." I tried to resist, to push back against the figure's words, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The Dark Somnium had me in its grasp, and it would not let go. I felt myself being pulled down into a vortex of darkness, a tunnel that stretched out before me like an endless abyss. The figure reached out a hand and touched my forehead, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of the past and present. I saw the world in all its glory, from the birth of the first stars to the final moments of human civilization. And I saw the Dark Somnium itself, a vast and labyrinthine city that sprawled across dimensions and realities like a living thing. I saw the creatures that lived there, beings of pure energy that twisted and writhed like living darkness. And I knew that I was one of them now. The figure's words echoed in my mind as I fell deeper into the abyss. "You are home," it said. "You are where you were meant to be." And with those words, everything went black.